Hi, I'm Adam Smith, co-lead educator on the School of English MOOC Literature of the English Country House, and I'm outside today because it's actually the hottest day in all of Sheffield history. And I'm joined by postgraduate student Lauren Nixon. On Literature of the Country House this week, we're reading the works of Jane Austen and we're thinking of the role of the country house in Jane Austen's literature, so it seemed to make sense to borrow some of Lauren's time. Lauren is writing a PhD about Jane Austen, and you've actually written 3 books about Jane Austen already, most recently the Jane Austen Miscellany. So Lauren, you've written 3 books on Jane Austen and you're studying a PhD at the moment, which is also about Jane Austen. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Austen and how it all came about?
Well, I started reading Jane Austen when I was about 11, when I stumbled into the back part of my school library that was so covered in dust because no one had ever been in it, and found that there was such a thing as a classic, which I thought, being a 11-year-old who fancied herself as, you know, Matilda, that would be a good place for me to go. And A is at the start of the alphabet. So Austen was the first one that I picked up. But also, you know, I was aware of Colin Firth and his shirt. And my mum made me watch the film version of Mansfield Park, which was very, very misleading about Mansfield Park. And I read Mansfield Park first. Was very disappointed. But then started reading them. And then all through my teenage years read them again and again, and then forced my way into the Jane Austen Centre in Bath. So I started working there at the January of my first year of undergraduate. And then, even though I'd always loved Austen and I'd always connected with Austen and I'd always fancied myself as one of her heroines, the older I got and the more involved I got, the relationship that I had with her changed. So it kind of went from the relationship that Catherine Morland has with Anne Radcliffe, which is this sort of almost reverential worship, to, I almost felt like she was kind of, not my best friend, because that would be a really creepy thing to say, but she was always the one that I could turn to, and she would always have the right thing to say.
So we're encountering Austen, educators and learners this week on the course Literature of the English Country House. Would you like to say a few words about the role of the country house in Austen's novels?
So country houses in Jane Austen are very important because what she's writing about is a very domestic space, and what she's interested in is the domestic life that takes place within the country house. There's a lot of criticism, particularly towards Emma, that nothing happens in Emma because there's no big set pieces, there's no dramas. You know, at least with Pride and Prejudice, you've got a lot of moving around, you've got these reveals, you've got these scandals, you've almost got some violence actually, you've got some action. And Austen's criticised quite often for ignoring what's happening at the time. So you've got the Revolutionary Wars and people are saying, well, why is she not talking about all of these things that are going on? And she is talking about them, but what she's interested in isn't what's on the surface, it's what's below the surface. So how do all of these things affect what goes on within the country house? So she's interested in looking at people's domestic lives and what that says about these different characters. But in terms of the house itself, she embraces that idea that Pope kind of starts, where the country house is the expression of the person who resides within it, who presides over it, and who runs it. So there's that whole section with Darcy when Lizzie goes to Pemberley and she sees Pemberley for the first time, and it dramatically changes the way that she thinks about Darcy and the way that she perceives his character, because what she sees is a well-maintained estate. She sees an estate that's grand without being over the top, that is tasteful, but it isn't kind of gaudy. It's well looked after, but it's not the be-all and end-all. So what it's saying about Darcy is that he is a man of taste, he is a man of both sense and sensibility. Lizzie's interaction with the housekeeper, with the servants at Pemberley, is really what changes her mind, because they all say he's the most fantastic master, he's so generous, he's so kind. When you find out about what really went on with Wickham and the way that he behaved towards Wickham, and Lizzie starts to realise that a man who could maintain such an estate, who could preside over all of these people, and they could all be so happy, they could love him so dearly, he must be a true gentleman, because in the 1740s, 1750s, you start to get the sentimentality and the sensibility coming in, and you get this notion of husbandry, which essentially meant that a gentleman had to be a gentleman if he looked after his estate. So having an estate wasn't just about having a house that you lived in and held fancy parties. It was about all the people that lived on it, the tenants, the farmers. It was about the things that you produced the people that you looked after. And if all of those things were successful, then the society would say you were a fine gentleman.
We spent a lot of time on the course this week at Chatsworth House filming. There's been a lot of conversations about Chatsworth and the relationship between Chatsworth and Austen's Pemberley. Do you want to weigh in on this debate, Lauren?
Pemberley and Chatsworth are definitely interlinked, if only because the film was filmed there and it worked very, very well. I know some of the learners perhaps wondering how someone who is only a Mr. Darcy could be in possession of an estate like Chatsworth. But we have to remember Darcy's connections. His father was obviously a well-landed gentleman. His mother, we assume, comes from status and from money because his aunt is Lady Catherine. And obviously that's also through marriage, but you have to be of a certain status to marry a certain status. There is the kind of semi-controversial issue about his name. We know that he's Fitzwilliam Darcy. We know that that's his mother's maiden name, which brings into question perhaps, you know, their illegitimate royalty, part of the Fitz line. So Chatsworth is potentially a very good model for Pemberley in terms of what Austen's thinking about when she's thinking about these peak district country homes. But what we have to bear in mind is, like I mentioned in the blog post, Austen never left the south. She's talking about all of these things, you know, Lizzie's going on these lovely tours. She's never been there. Yeah. It's very much like Radcliffe in The Italian. She's literally just learning from what she's been given. But I think what a lot of people don't realise is that in the Regency period in particular, we have people publishing books about their houses. Yeah. Very, very vain in a lot of ways, but people were very proud of their homes, and they thought that they, in this model of sensibility, that they could elicit a response and a feeling from other people from what they had created. So Pemberley, certainly I think in its creation there is something of Chatsworth there. It is the gem of Derbyshire. So the place that she's growing up in is very much the same space that the Dashwood sisters are occupying when they moved to the cottage, and that the Bennet sisters are occupying and that Catherine Morland's occupying. And as I mentioned, these are the first ones to be written. So this is the world of Jane's adolescence, of her childhood. And then Edward Austen gets adopted by the knights. He's elevated to one of, you know, quite a high rank in society. He eventually becomes the local magistrate. He's Sir Edward Austen. And all of a sudden she's within the country home. And she's not just seeing it as a friend or a visitor, she's seeing it as the sister of, you know, the lord of the house. And she and Cassandra were brought to Godmersham frequently because they came to look after their home when Mrs. Knight was giving birth, and that was quite often because they had 11 children. And she starts to learn what it is to be a Darcy and a Knightley. So that's why we get this shift from the peripheral characters being these landed gentlemen to being at the heart of the novel. And we don't just get landed gentlemen, we're getting landed gentlewomen. Emma would never have existed if it hadn't have been for Fanny Knight, her eldest niece on that side of the family. She ended up taking over the whole house after the age of 16. And it really gives her the ability to shape something realistic, not just this kind of, you know, we get it a lot in the Gothic, there's these faux castles that never existed anywhere in that state. So I think when we're thinking about Pemberley, Chatsworth might be the image that we hold in our minds, but Godmersham is what we really need to be thinking about when we're thinking about the way that it works and the life that Lizzie and Darcy would have had there after their marriage and after we close that final page of the novel. Is Godmersham Park, and it's what was going on there. And definitely for Mansfield Park, it's basically the same house. Yeah. Like, when you read the descriptions and then you look at the pictures of Godmersham, she's just plagiarised very seriously. So yeah, I would definitely say we don't write Chatsworth off. Chatsworth is still an important part, but I think you've just got to bear in mind she never saw it. She'd have known about it. You know, the Devonshire family were famous, if not infamous. She comments on Georgiana a few times in her letters, indirectly. And she would have known about it. She had family that would have visited, but for herself, I don't think it would have been the crucial inspiration. I'll probably get crucified for this. And unfortunately, I can't take you all to Godmersham to prove this to you. But there is a heritage centre there, so you can go and visit it and find out more about it. But unfortunately, that part of the Austen puzzle is going to be something that's partially lost for us forever, so you just have to believe me.
Okay, thanks very much.